on that note, let's get ready for Michael Rothstein. He's up there at Flowery Branch every single day. And this is another winnable game. And matter of fact, Michael, we've got to win this game, don't we?
Yeah, by the way, every single day except for today, because I'm actually in Orlando today. Fairly historic boxing match happening tonight.
Right.
So I've taken a break from that. I will be in Nashville tomorrow, but I'm staring outside of my hotel room in Orlando today.
I know Mike's a big boxing guy.
Yeah, this is a big game, though.
Right. Well, the thing is, the physical nature, by the way, as a journalist who covers football all this time, how surprised were you, by the way, Vrabel was acting so squirrely over the dual quarterback question?
I'm not, because, listen, there's, precisely less than zero tape, except for maybe a little bit of preseason on Will Levis. There's a little bit more on Malik Willis. It's the rare time in the NFL where you can legitimately be like, I don't know what you – sorry, can't help you. Don't know what you're going to do. Right. Because I don't think they know what they're going to do. It would actually not surprise me at all if we see both of those guys play. It really wouldn't, because – what have we seen from Malik Willis, right? Like, our sample size has been poor. We'll call it that. So say they do start Malik Willis and he plays badly. Well, then they'll go to Will Levis really quick. Say they go with Levis then, and it's not going well, then they'll go to Malik Willis. Like, I don't think they're beholden to sticking to one guy, you know?
Michael Rothstein joining us on Dukes and Bell with John Fricke for Carl today. Hey, Michael, I got a quick question for you, and that is, in regards to being bullish on the Falcons, because I'm this close to saying that I think that this Falcons team can put some distance between themselves and the rest of the division. I kind of like where they are, and I think that you got to talk me off this ledge, because I'll go full homer on you, Mike, that I think that this team's going to start to pull away in this division.
There's good evidence that could be the case. I'm not going to sit here and try to wet blanket or reason you there completely, and it's because of this. The one key is turnovers, right? Like, Desmond Ridder doesn't fumble 3 times in the red zone, which hadn't happened in 45 years. 45 years. Right. One player hasn't fumbled 3 times in the red zone. They win that game by double digits. Like, Desmond doesn't throw 3 interceptions. You can argue that they're right in that game against Washington. So I don't always go with, like, okay, the coach that I cover is saying this, so, I have to believe it's true. Absolutely not. Like, that's not the case. But the reality when you look at it is they've put up over 400 yards of offense each the last 3 weeks. Desmond Ridder's thrown for more than 250 yards each of the last 250 or more yards, each of the last 3 weeks. So their passing game is there. We know their running game exists, even though it's been a little bit hit or miss. But if teams have to start worrying about Desmond Ridder throwing the ball and Drake London and Kyle Pitts, that's going to open things up for Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier and Cordero Patterson. And the one thing we can say with pretty good consistency right now is their defense is good. It's good at every level, and they have some depth everywhere. And defense, generally, once you're starting to see a defense be good in a season, that defense ends up being good all year. It's not like all of a sudden things will flip on you, barring, obviously, some sort of injury.
Michael Rothstein with us from ESPN.com covering the Falcons. One of the weird numbers we found, Michael, looking at this week's matchup is Titans are really good against the run, but the last 2 weeks they've really gotten blown up in the run game. They do base 3-4. You think can we get the run game going, and is Bijan going to have a big day after all the weirdness last week?
It's funny. I actually do think Bijan Robinson's going to have a big day. Go back to this, right? Okay. And I'm not saying that any of this was planned. Being very, very clear, none of this was, I think, fully planned throughout the game. But what happened after Drake London only had 1 target and a drop? And what was the immediate response by the Falcons the next week? They got Drake London going early because there's a whole bunch of attention on Drake London. Well, there's been a lot of attention on Bijan Robinson. If it is to be believed that it was headaches, Heath has said all week he has been fine. I talked to him on Wednesday. I talked to him a little bit on Thursday. He seems like the type of guy, too, who's like, you know what, listen, I'm good now. I'm going to go play now. And almost every week that he's done that, we've seen him have some level of success. So I would say, yeah, there's a possibility. But the good thing for the Falcons right now is that they do have 3 guys who can run the ball and can run with success. You look at what they did against Tampa, And you don't need to necessarily rely on Bijan Robinson as much as you were doing maybe in weeks 2, 3, and 4 when the passing game wasn't really working at all, and Cordero Patterson was still hurt, and it was basically Bijan, and you kind of rolled the dice.
Yeah, it is. On the other side of the ball, Michael Rothstein, I'm kind of curious about. I think that one of the reasons that you're getting a lot of, like, we could sit here and talk about some of the holding calls that were called last week on the defense that I just went, okay, whatever. But this is refereeing in the NFL. I mean, it's just throw your hands up when AJ Terrell's like, I'm holding Mike. If I'm holding Mike Evans, I got to see it. But okay. But the Falcons now with these two cornerbacks, in Okudah and Terrell, they now can be in a position where they can play pretty much press a lot, can't they? I mean, and that doesn't that kind of change the scheme a little bit, where you're not going to be able to get off the ball if you're like a team like Tennessee that doesn't necessarily have wideouts that can beat you?
Yeah, I mean, that's part of it. But by the way, like, let's calm down a little bit. I'll let Blankenship reason this, right? Don't get all upset about holding calls and penalties, because guess what? It happens to every team around the league. Because you're just watching your team. You're just watching one team, and you're like, I can't believe this happened. It happens to every team around the league. Every team around the league thinks that they're too penalized too much. I remember talking to AJ about it after the game. I was like, man, you got 3 of them. And he's like, yeah, it almost was like he expected it a little bit, because he knew it was a physical game against Mike Evans and Chris Cox. And in physical games, that's sometimes going to happen. I'm not really concerned about that. But what they have been able to do, because don't forget the Alford in this equation, and don't forget the safety duo of Jesse Bates and Richie Grant. Their secondary has been very good, and that's allowed their pressure to start to get home, not necessarily always with sacks, sometimes with just quarterback hits or pressures, but all of that works together. We heard Dean Pease for 2 years talk about how all of that stuff works in concert, and it just never quite worked. Well, now we're seeing what happens when it works.
Michael Rothstein is with us, guys. Talk about that defense, which has been great. I know it might be a pipe dream, and we'll talk next week on Friday, but do you think they'll do anything at the trade deadline, barring some kind of crazy injury this weekend? I know that a lot of folks, and I apologize for pumping air into that fire. I'd love the idea of going and get Danielle Hunter and locking him up, and then having a one edge rusher, go get another next year's draft, and then basically got everything you need on this team.
No, I get where you're coming from. I do, but the question will be, how much capital do you want to give up?
Right.
What are teams really selling there, or is that just smoke? The one thing I think we've learned about the Falcons is this: they're not afraid to be transactional in nature. Those first 2 years, it felt like every week there was cycling, and maybe practice squad cycling, but they were always cycling. They're always looking to make moves. Remember, a year ago, they traded Dean Marlowe. They traded Calvin Ridley. Like, they're not afraid to make moves. I think it's just going to be a matter of, is there something that makes sense for them? And is it something that will not hurt them too much down the road? Because I get where you're coming from, Bell, with Danielle Hunter. I do, except for this. You already have a defensive line group that is older, right?
Right.
David Omenyata, Grady's almost 30, Calais is 37. Like, if you're going to do that, you almost want to get younger there, because that, to me, is the area where you're going to maybe have to put some off-season capital into getting younger there fast. So I don't know if Danielle Hunter makes a lot of sense, because you're probably going to have to give up a good amount of draft capital to get him. That's just where I'm at. Now, could they do it? Sure, they could do it. I'm just telling you, the way that they have operated, to me, has said they don't necessarily want to give up the draft capital unless it's something they really believe will work very well, very quick.
Mike and I were talking a little bit about this, about Arthur Smith going back to Tennessee. Any advantage at all in that, or has it been too far removed?
I asked Arthur Smith about that. I don't think there will be. Listen, their offense, they're talking about Atlanta, it's changed so drastically each of the 3 years that Arthur Smith has even been here. I don't think so. It could be interesting in kind of that, critical – I'm just going to spitball this, right? Like, critical situation, like these guys know each other really well. So, is Arthur or Mike going to try and do something to see if they can get him to waste a timeout or something like that? Yeah, maybe there's some of that, chess match stuff. But it's been a few years at this point, and the rosters have been turned over so much in Tennessee, and obviously Atlanta's roster was completely different than when Arthur Smith took over. So I just don't know. I don't really buy into that all that much. If a bunch of those guys like Rags and whatever were here a year ago. Like, that's the one interesting thing would be Charles London in that conversation, because he's obviously in Tennessee now. But he didn't get that much work with Desmond Ridder, and I think it's a different Desmond Ridder we're seeing now than it was when he worked with him a year ago. So I don't even know if there's that level that they can maybe pull from any of that. I think if there's one area of advantage, potentially, and it's a very small one, it's maybe that Charles London is on the other side there, so he might have a little bit more understanding of Arthur's offense and what they're doing defensively. But remember, it's a new defensive coordinator, so that looks completely different too.
Right. Well, fun down there at the fight, man. We'll talk to you next week. Michael Rothstein back to Music City for the game from ESPN.com. Catch him every day there on the waitforit.com hotline.